When The Incredibles released in 2004, not a single MCU film was out yet. How does the film still hold up today, and what about the sequel, Incredibles 2, which came out in 2018? I'll be talking about both of these films in this review. Hi, my name's Stu and welcome to another review video on Flying Wiener. Hard to believe, but until this past weekend I had not seen Incredibles 1 or 2 before. Always were on my list, just never got around to actually doing it. Very interesting to see, I must say, and straight off the bat, the information I usually present up here about the film, it will address both films. If some piece of information is only applicable to one of them, I'll make sure to put a 1 or 2 next to that, so that that's clear. I'll be talking about both films individually shortly and then make a comparison between both to give you that edge as well, in case you're trying to decide which one of the two to watch first. Starting with Incredibles 1, and I'll say this straight away, it's really funny because Incredibles 1 feels like a film that's typically a sequel. It's very, very different, and I must say I really like the idea of the film, and to think that when this came out, like I say, not a single MCU film had been out, so we were not used to these superheroes being so dominant in life and the box office, etc. In 2004 you only had a few X-Men films really. It was even before the first Batman film in Christopher Nolan's trilogy came out, which was a year after Batman Begins. So it is important to put yourself in that mindset, and to have this film, which, to really briefly summarise it, asks the question whether we should let superheroes help society in the way they do, and to ask this question 12 years before Captain America Civil War and Batman v Superman came out is really interesting. But that's basically what this film is about, so it does not start like you would expect it to, that we have just these superheroes and we're following their whole battle throughout the whole film. It actually starts with very briefly, yes, in the beginning they are their usual superheroes. It's set in the 50s, 60s by the way, so that should also be kept in mind. And the problem is that the superheroes, they do cause injuries at times, or property damage, all these kind of things. There is collateral damage as well. We see that a lot in all sorts of superhero films nowadays, but The Incredibles immediately asks the question back in 2004, are we going to allow this as a society? And in the world of The Incredibles, superheroes have been banned, they are made illegal. And so you have the Parr family, that is who we are focused on. You have 5 family members, and they all have superpowers apart from the little baby Jack. By the way, is it just me? I mean, is this a just Struan thing? But I find the name Jack really weird. Why not just call him Jack? I mean, what is the Jack supposed to be about? Maybe you can tell me in the comments, I don't know. But we're focusing on the Parr family, and they have been relocated, so it's like a witness protection program. The superheroes are relocated, given new identities and such, and they are helped to make a new life just as an ordinary family. This is an issue that the family father, Bob, has real trouble to deal with, because he really misses his time as Mr. Incredible. So not just the whole glory of it, but he genuinely just gets a rush from saving people, which is understandable. I'm sure if you're a person with these kind of abilities and you want to help people, it must be really frustrating not being allowed to do so. I absolutely understand where he's coming from. Just the thought of people maybe dying and knowing you could have prevented that, it must really drive him crazy. So Bob, who is played by Craig T. Nelson, he has a friend, his name is Lucius, played by Samuel L. Jackson. Spoiler warning, and it is quite frustrating, but having to watch a film with Samuel L. Jackson without him swearing once is kinda a bit frustrating as well. But I suppose it's okay. I mean, it's Samuel L. Jackson, he's cool anyway. But the two of them, they secretly go out and save people. It's quite amusing because they put on balaclavas, so they actually look like thugs and criminals, but they're actually illegally doing hero work to save people. It is a very, very interesting thing to think about, and like I say, it's a question that's been explored in the past few years in the typical superhero films that we are now used to in cinema. But again, 2004, before all of this, The Incredibles did it first. Just to finish off the plot, what it is about, Bob finds a way to sort of become a superhero again. You can see that his life spark returns, basically. And there is an antagonist, I won't spoil him at all, but a very, very worthy protagonist, and he's got a sort of personal chip on his shoulder with one of the family members. And that is done very well too, because the antagonist, he tries to avoid certain tropes. It's nearly a fourth wall break in the film where he goes, sorry, I started monologuing, the typical thing that villains do, and then something happens to sort of foil their plans, etc. So it is done very, very intelligently. And yes, I won't spoil how it goes. That is the basic gist of it. Like I say, superheroes have been made illegal, and we focus on this family and how they regain their status, and if possible, if they can, of being a superhero. Now, what makes the film very interesting, apart from the premise itself, of course, is that the superhero thing, while it does drive the plot, it is not exactly the focus of the film. We are focused on the family and their relationships with each other, and I read, because I researched the films a bit, that Brad Bird, the writer and director of both films, he wanted this to be the focus. So the superhero things is injected into the film, of course it is, but he wanted the focus to be in the family because that's what he's actually interested in. Generally speaking, this is actually quite an interesting aspect of the film, so much that I feel that it isn't a film for small kids. So I'm having trouble to say exactly what age I think that kids should be when you take them to see this film, but I believe it's from 6 years up. I don't think that 6-year-olds are the right audience for this film, so maybe something like 9 or 10ish, because just generally the whole conversations that are going on and the interactions and even the violence, to be perfectly honest, I don't think that's really for small kids, because you have people dying, being just outright killed. You don't see it, but when you think about what you actually just didn't see on screen, it is a bit disturbing. That is one thing I definitely like about this film, so it's very, very enjoyable as an adult. It's definitely not one of these just kids films with popcorn spectacle, absolutely not. It is very interesting because there's an aspect in it it's like infidelity, I'll call it, cheating, but it's not directly that, so it's not about one spouse cheating on the other with another person, but it's sort of like a parallel to that, so it seems very much like that. And one of the characters feels very betrayed. So this film does at times explore very, very mature topics, which I found very interesting, and that makes it really entertaining. It is an animated film, and generally speaking, I am not a huge fan of just purely computer generated films. I will typically prefer actual drawn films, so classic animation when it's done well, because I feel it just gives a lot more options and uniqueness when it comes to the actual style. The first Incredibles in particular, I feel that even for 2004, it wasn't that good, the animation style. I mean, I read up that they had a lot of trouble doing it, and a lot of new things had to be thought of, developed, just to make this film possible, with human skin and hair and all these kind of things. And while obviously that's admirable and I have a lot of understanding for it, I feel, at least to my memory, that I had seen better animated films at that time, just generally speaking. When you look at buildings or you look at a forest, for instance, you can just see that it all seems a bit copy-pasted, and there's just not many details in the surrounding area, and that is essentially what makes the difference, a big difference, the details. Because you just have clean surfaces without any ridges or dirt on them, talking again about the buildings, for instance, and it just makes it all seem a bit unreal. I mean, obviously it is unreal, but you know what I'm saying. I thought the animation wasn't quite up to scratch in the first Incredibles film, and just generally speaking, this is one thing I definitely don't like about, and this happens more in computer animation than classical animation, although it does happen there, of course, as well, is just the proportions of characters. I mean, in this film, half the time I just had to laugh at Bob, Mr. Incredible, just because his proportions are just so incredibly exaggerated. I mean, and then you have Helen Parr, who is voiced by Holly Hunter, with the wide hips and that, and I don't know, it's just, I feel it's so distracting at times. I talked about this briefly in my review of Soul, which you can see if you click on the link up here. I just find it weird when they have these exaggerated proportions and that. I don't know, I'm not a big fan of that. Moving on to the second Incredibles film. It is, again, not a typical superhero film, but to think that it came out 14 years later, so 2018, and at a time after we had already so many different films, the MCU was coming along quite well. In 2018, I mean, that was when Avengers Infinity War was released, so we were sort of nearing the end of the first big Marvel storyline that went throughout all of them, and then you had a lot of DC films already as well. Wonder Woman had already been out, Suicide Squad, all sorts of films. So again, The Incredibles, they sort of went their own way, which I think is great. I quite like that. The story is slightly different, so it takes off actually right after the first one ended. So superheroes are still illegal, but there is a particularly rich company that wants to reinstate superheroes, make them legal again. And so they come into contact with the Parrs, and they want to slowly change public opinion on superheroes and get it to improve, and through that get nations to allow superheroes again. And to do so, they think it's most advantageous to have Helen Parr, just singly Elastigirl, to be the driving force of this, which is obviously a difficult thing for Bob because he is Mr. Incredible, and obviously he's dying to get it back out again and do his superhero stuff. So Bob becomes a stay-at-home father, taking care of the 3 kids, which turns out to be a really, really big challenge. I must admit, this film, the second film in particular, felt a bit too close to home because I am myself now a stay-at-home father. I'm on parental leave, taking care of my daughter for the next half year. And it's just one kid, and it is a struggle, I must say, at least for me it is. I expected it to be difficult, but it turned out to be even more difficult. And so to see this on screen and him with his lack of sleep and all that, it was slightly traumatic. No, but honestly, it's done really, really well. I like this whole concept of it. It is very interesting. And it is good because, again, it does not recycle things that we have seen before. They don't go the expected route. They, again, try to tell a unique story in this world where we are so familiar now with all sorts of comic book properties. Also in this film, the focus is not the superhero stuff. Yes, it's what drives the plot ultimately, but the focus is still on the family and how they are dealing with these things. As you can imagine, like I already said, Bob is having trouble figuring out whether he can actually do this, not just the family stuff, but while Helen is out there, he is not able to go out and do his own stuff as well. So I feel that this whole family dynamic, it really, really carries well from the first to the second film, and I like that it's the focus. As you can imagine, just to also drive the plot, there is a villain, and he wants to sort of use this situation where he can see superheroes creeping up again. He wants to use this situation to sort of ultimately make the world distrust them completely. So there's a plan devised to make superheroes just fall from grace so that they will never ever be allowed back again. And yes, I obviously won't spoil that plot either. Generally speaking, the second film, it does not quite hold up to the first one. So the first one I feel is the superior of the 2 films. If you're choosing to only watch one, I would say go with the first one because it just feels a bit more unique because it was the first one, and just the whole plot is better, I feel, because the second one, it does feel a bit predictable at times and just not quite as interesting. Villain-wise, the first one wins outright, so that is also a very big point for me. What is better in the second film, though, as you can imagine, is the animation. Obviously, 14 years are a long time, and Pixar developed a lot of things in that time as well, so the animations are far superior. The skin doesn't look as unreal anymore, so it's not this really absolutely smooth surface. generally the surfaces now on the buildings, you can actually see dirt and you can see age and all these things. And I feel that they particularly wanted to show off the lighting, because the first film is very, very bright. A lot of it's during day. And in the second film, quite a lot of it actually happens while it's a bit darker outside, nighttime, etc., because you can see a lot of lighting effects going on, which I absolutely understand, because again, coming back to my review of Soul, I talked about it there as well. Lighting is really essential when it's about making things look realistic. So you have a lot of light and shadow effects in this film that are really, really magnificent. I absolutely love them. The proportions of the characters are still way out of place, so I'm still not a fan of them, but at least now they look a bit more realistic, as in terms of skin, etc. I said earlier that I would be making a comparison, just in case you do want to know my detailed thoughts on which film is the superior one. I'll just go through it piece by piece. The story, generally speaking, I feel is better than the first one. It feels more original, and I just feel that is a bit more exciting. It's a bit more interesting than the second one. The second part story is good as well. I just found it a bit too predictable, and like I say, just not quite as gripping as with the first film. Thinking about the superheroing, I would say both are pretty even in what they show on screen. I don't think that one film shows particularly more or better action than the other. It's generally quite good in both. If you're a fan of the family dynamic, I would say it is better than the second one, although jumping into just the second one might not be quite as good if you have not seen or know the story of the first one. I would recommend that you watch both of them in order. As this is a comparison, the family stuff is better than the second one. Animation is not really a thing that you need to compare here. The second one is obviously miles ahead, coming out 14 years later. It's particularly evident when you look at the characters and the mouth when it's going while they're talking, because you have two people in particular where I noticed it. One is Helen, the mother of the family, who's played by Holly Hunter. Second person is the owner of this rich company trying to reinstate superheroes. He's played by Bob Odenkirk, and both he and Holly Hunter have this thing where the edge of the mouth goes up a bit when they're smiling, smirking, or just talking, and that's carried over into the animated characters as well. So they obviously worked a lot with motion capture, etc., and that translates to the characters even. So the facial animations in particular make this stand out, as well as lights, shadows, all these things, more smooth movements. It's obvious though. The humour, I would say, is good in both films, although I feel that it is a bit better in the second film. Definitely very, very entertaining for an adult as well. So generally speaking, not just the theme, but the humour is not necessarily directed at kids only. Acting is great in both films, so I would not say that you have an advantage in one or the other films. So not just the family themselves are wonderful, but all the side characters do a magnificent job. Direction is the same in both films. It is written and directed by the same person. Both films also really feel the same. So also there's not really an advantage, I would say, in one film or the other. As you can see, one film does not really pull that much ahead, mainly for the story and just for the more interesting villain aspect. I would say the first one is better. Watch both of them, they're a lot of fun. I can't wait until my daughter is old enough so that we can start a, I don't know, fun film Sunday or whatever you want to call it. And that'll be a lot of fun, just going through all sorts of films, sharing my passion with her. And Incredibles is a film that both films that I would definitely put on that list and look forward to enjoying with her as well. That's it from me today. Have you seen Incredibles 1 and 2? Have you got a preference when it comes to one or the other? What did you think of the film Incredibles in the 2004 context? Are there any other Disney Pixar films that you would recommend that I watch? Leave all that down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like on it, subscribing to the channel for more videos, share it around as well if you want to. That would make me very happy. And I will see you in the next review video on Flying Wiener. Take care. Bye.